Have you ever finished a book that just, wow, completely captivated you? Like a story that felt so profound, so unique, and you just sit there wondering, why isn't this a household name?
Oh, absolutely. Or you stumble upon an older writer, maybe someone your grandparents read, and their brilliance feels like this amazing personal discovery.
Exactly. And then you find out they're barely remembered by the wider public. It's this really fascinating, almost perplexing experience, isn't it?
It really is that feeling of like unearthing a hidden gem.
But then you puzzle over why it was hidden in the first place.
hmm How could something this good not be widely celebrated? It's baffling sometimes.
And that's precisely what we're diving into today. Our mission is to take a really deep dive into that intriguing, often pretty complex world of underrated and forgotten authors.
Yeah, we're talking about those literary treasures
Hmm.
that, for all sorts of reasons, cultural, historical, maybe just plain bad luck, or even surprisingly systemic ones, haven't quite landed in the mainstream consciousness.
Or they were there for a bit and then sadly slipped out over time.
Exactly. So our goal today is to unpack why. Why do some truly brilliant literary voices just not get the widespread recognition they so clearly deserve?
Whether that's, popular fame, consistent sales, getting into the academic canon, or even just managing to stay in print.
Right, we'll explore the surprising, often kind of tangled factors that contribute to their obscurity, and we're drawing insights from sharp literary critics, lively discussions on places like Reddit, where readers really champion their favorites.
Oh yeah, those threads can be gold mines.
They really can. And also from in-depth academic analyses that reveal some deeper patterns.
So get ready for some genuine aha moments because we're about to shine a light on writers you might never have heard of, but absolutely unequivocally should be reading.
You might just find your next favorite author.
Wouldn't that be great? And maybe you'll even become a champion for their work after this. That initial feeling of discovery, it's so potent, isn't it? But it also begs that deeper question. What do we actually mean when we say a writer is underrated or forgotten in this huge, swirling ocean of literature? It feels so subjective, but it's a concept we all kind of get.
Yeah, you're right to question the subjectivity. It's rarely a simple judgment of quality. That's often the first assumption, right? That they just weren't good enough.
Right.
But actually, it's often a complex interplay. Think popular perception versus critical or academic acclaim. Or sometimes it's even about the writer's own choices, or just external stuff that impacts their visibility and, how long they stick around in the public mind.
Okay, so less a simple good or bad thing.
Exactly. More about how a book fits, or maybe doesn't fit, into the whole ecosystem, publishing, academia, public attention. It makes the whole topic way more nuanced and honestly much more interesting.
That's a really crucial distinction. So it's not just about inherent quality, but how a book navigates those, I don't know, capricious currents of literary reputation.
That's a good way to put it.
Does that mean some authors might be objectively brilliant, but completely miss the mark with the public because of those other factors, like bad timing or wrong genre, and there's nothing they can do?
Precisely, yeah. Let's look at a few distinct categories that help us understand this better. One common scenario is what we call the writer's writer.
Okay.
These are authors who are just deeply revered by their peers,
Right.
by other influential writers, by discerning critics. But for whatever reason they struggle to get broad public recognition or achieve big sales figures.
Ah, like the musician's musician.
Exactly like that.
Oh.
Or the artist's artist. Their work inspires and challenges the best in their field, but they stay largely unknown outside that inner circle.
That writer's writer idea really crystallizes it. So give us some names. Who embodies this paradox perfectly?
Okay, a prime example is James Salter. Alex Bilmes, writing in Esquire, noted Salter's been saluted by a parade of literary giants. We're talking Saul Bellow, Joseph Heller, Philip Roth, John Irving.
Wow, heavy hitters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he got praise from critics like Susan Sontag and Harold Bloom, won big awards like the Peon Faulkner. His prose is known for this spare elegance, this really profound emotional depth, often exploring desire, regret, the kind of elusive nature of happiness with this devastating precision.
Sounds incredible.
It is.
Right.
But
Yeah.
despite all this towering praise from the absolute top of the literary world, Bilmes notes Salter was often dismissed by the press and overlooked by the Academy and almost consistently ignored by the public.
That's just wild. How can someone be so highly regarded by the masters yet fly under the radar for most readers? It feels like a real shame.
It does feel like a missed opportunity for so many readers, and Salter isn't alone in that an enviable category, as one critic put it.
Okay, who else fits?
John Williams, the author of Stoner. Tim Crater in The New Yorker put him right alongside Salter and Richard Yates.
Ah, Stoner. I have heard of that one eventually.
Right, it had this strange afterlife.
Mm.
Published back in 1965, it tells the quiet, almost unremarkable life story of an English professor. But it delves into these huge questions: existence, love, professional disappointment, with such precision and empathy that it's deeply moving.
Mm-hmm.
Famously, it became this unexpected bestseller in Europe decades later after a French writer championed it.
No kidding.
Yeah, Anna Gavalda.
Yeah.
Then it found this passionate readership across the continent. Yet here in the U.S., its home country, it remains largely undiscovered, mostly passed around and praised by, the bookish cognoscenti.
So it's still kind of niche here.
Pretty much.
It's even described as being famous for not being famous enough, which
Well,
perfectly captures this whole paradox, right?
It's famous for not being famous enough. That's brilliant. And bittersweet. It nails that frustrating gap. I actually pick up Stoner after hearing about that European resurgence. And yeah, I was floored by its quiet power. It's the kind of book you want to press into everyone's hands. Absolutely. You want to share the secret, that profound experience. And you mentioned a British author earlier in this vein.
Oh, right, Henry Green.
Yeah, Henry Green. Real name, Henry York. He occupied what David Lodge, a great critic and novelist himself, called a special but somewhat puzzling place in the history of modern English fiction.
Puzzling how?
Well, consider this. W.H. Auden, the giant of poetry, he called Green the best English novelist alive in 1952.
Wow, Auden said that.
Yep, and T.S. Eliot, another titan, cited Green's novels in '53 as proof that the creative advance in our age is in prose fiction.
Okay, so the critical praise was off the charts.
Absolutely. Green was known for highly experimental prose, this kind of poetic realism, evoking moods and scenes with incredible precision, often using sparse dialogue, unconventional sentences. Novels like Loving or Party Going have this almost impressionistic quality.
Sounds intriguing. Different.
Very different. But despite this, as Lodge points out, Green never enjoyed either the commercial success or the literary fame of contemporaries like Evelyn Waugh, Graham Greene, or Christopher Isherwood.
So adored by the best, but not a household name like those guys.
Exactly. He remained the writer's writer.
That's a fascinating category, these darlings of the cognoscenti. But then there are authors who become forgotten, not just by the public, but sometimes even by publishers, only to be rediscovered years later, almost like literary archaeology.
Right, that brings us to another category. Posthumous recognition. These are authors who only really gain significant traction or get rediscovered long after they've passed away.
Their work just languishes for decades.
Sometimes, yeah, until a new generation of readers or critics or scholars dusts it off and finally recognizes its value. Chester Himes is a really poignant example of this.
Chester Himes, tell me about him.
His early novels, these complex, realist novels of race relations, like if he hollers, let him go powerful stuff about racial injustice, the psychological toll of racism in America, they were met with indifference and scorn in America.
Seriously, scorn.
Yeah. So discouraged by the lack of recognition at home, he moved to France in the 50s. And there he found roaring success writing hard-boiled crime novels, the Coffin-Ed Johnson and Gravedigger Jones series.
Oh, I know those. From the movies, maybe?
Probably. They were initially written for French translation, found huge success there. But even then, they didn't make much money until Hollywood adapted them. By the time Himes died in 1984, believe it or not, all of his work was out of print in English in the U.S.
That's awful. His entire work gone.
In English in America, yes. It's only years later, thanks to dedicated publishers and scholars, that his books became widely available again, often through British reprints first.
Wow.
His biographer called him one of America's most neglected and misunderstood major writers, noting he remained even posthumously in exile in his homeland.
That's truly heartbreaking. To be brilliant, find success abroad, but have your work vanish in your own country, only rediscovered after you're gone. It really makes you wonder about the whims of literary fame.
It really does. And how much talent we might be missing.
Are there other reasons for obscurity? Like maybe a writer's style is just too unique, too innovative for a mass audience?
Absolutely. That's our third category, niche versus mass appeal. Some authors explore very specific genres or use really unique narrative styles. And while these might be brilliant, innovative even to a dedicated reader, They might not click with the broadest audience.
So it limits their mainstream visibility, creates more of a cult following, maybe?
Exactly. It's not a judgment on quality, not at all. It's just acknowledging how certain artistic choices can shape an author's reach.
Can you give an example? What kind of narrative style might make a book less digestible for the average reader?
Well, think about experimental techniques. Say a story told entirely in the second person. You do this, you feel that.
Oh, yeah, that can be intense.
Incredibly immersive. Creates this unusual intimacy, right? But it demands a different kind of engagement. Or maybe a highly nonlinear structure, jumping around in time. You, the reader, have to actively piece the plot together.
Instead of just following along.
Right. Or even a story told from the perspective of, I don't know, an inanimate object. That offers a truly alien, fascinating viewpoint on us humans.
Okay, I can see how that might not be everyone's cup of tea.
Exactly. These are super creative choices. They push boundaries, offer unique insights, but they often require more effort, more active participation from the reader. They can feel disorienting if you're expecting a more traditional story.
So powerful for some, but maybe off-putting for others just looking for a straightforward read.
Precisely. Which naturally leads to a smaller, more dedicated following rather than, hitting the bestseller lists.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's dive into some specific examples of these literary treasures from across the pond. Some truly unique voices that deserve a bigger spotlight.
Yeah, these aren't just names. They're whole worlds waiting to be explored. Let's start with someone who sounds like he stepped right out of a dream. Robert Walser.
Robert Walser. Okay.
Benjamin Weissman, in the LA Times, described him as the dreamy confectionery snowflake of German language fiction.
Wow. Dreamy confectionery snowflake. I love that.
Isn't that great? Weissman also, more boldly, called him the single most underrated writer of the 20th century.
Whoa. Okay, high praise. What's his writing like?
It's characterized by this almost childlike wonder, an uncanny ability to find beauty in the mundane, and this light, whimsical touch that actually hides some deep philosophical insights. He wrote a lot about walking, about solitude, the inner lives of seemingly ordinary people. His sentences are described as quite delicious, and he's lauded as a sentence artist of the highest magnitude. He's crafting prose that's both intricate and deceptively simple.
So why isn't he better known?
Well, despite reissues of his perfect novel, Jacob von Gutten, it's about a young man at a school for servants booksellers, apparently rarely stock him. And his personal story adds to the intrigue, and maybe the obscurity. He spent his last 27 years in an asylum in Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
And he kept writing, but in this microscopic script called microgram.
Micrograms. That's incredible.
Yeah. So this mix of exquisite craft, a unique, almost ethereal voice, and this reclusive, almost tragic life story. It makes his obscurity really puzzling. He seems ripe for rediscovery, especially if you like Kafka. Kafka was a huge admirer of his.
Dreamy confectionery snowflake. I'm already intrigued. And the micrograms thing? Wow. A true eccentric genius. Okay, moving back to England, you mentioned Henry Green earlier, the writer's writer. What more about him and his enigmatic persona? How did that play into him being overlooked?
Right, Henry Green or Henry York. He really lived up to that enigmatic master label. His literary identity was famously elusive. He came from a wealthy industrialist family, but his novels often depicted working-class lives, servants, people in factories, capturing their dialogue and inner worlds with amazing authenticity.
So he wrote against his background in a way.
Very much so. And his experimental style, as we said, was distinct, admired by Auden and Eliot. But Evelyn Waugh, a contemporary and admirer, actually blamed Green's choice to publish under a pseudonym of peculiar drabness for his lack of popular success.
He thought the name Henry Green was too boring.
Apparently. Waugh felt it was almost intentionally obscure, generic rather than distinctive.
That's a bold move for an author who wants to be read. So did he actively cultivate this mystery?
It seems like it. Unlike many authors seeking publicity, Green, after a certain point, famously refused to have his portrait taken. There's this one iconic photo, but it only shows the back of his head. He's turned away.
No way. Just the back of his head.
Yep. This deliberate elusiveness, distancing himself from public life, certainly didn't help commercially, even as literary giants were praising his work as a creative advance. His focus on dialogue, almost excluding narrative description sometimes, his stylistic quirks like omitting articles, it made his work unique, challenging, not always immediately accessible.
So, admired by the insiders, but maybe a bit difficult for the average reader, and he didn't help himself with the publicity shy thing.
Pretty much. Highly admired by those who knew literature deeply, but not easy to know as a public figure or, for some, as a straightforward read.
It seems like some authors almost resist fame or at least don't actively chase it. But then there are those who are foundational figures in their own country but almost unknown elsewhere. We saw that with John Williams here, but what about a European example? Someone huge nationally but less recognized globally.
A great case is José María de Essa de Queiroz. He was a 19th century Portuguese author who basically introduced realism to Portugal. Think Flaubert or Zola, but for Portugal.
So a major figure.
Huge. His novels are known for sharp social commentary, irony, detailed depictions of Portuguese society, especially the hypocrisy and decaying aristocracy. Works like The Mayas or The Crime of Father Amaro are absolute classics in Portugal.
But not so much outside Portugal.
Right. A Reddit user mentioned wishing he was more widely read and acknowledged here in the U.S. It's a common experience, right?
Yeah.
It just points to how geography and language barriers can massively impact an author's global recognition, even if they're profoundly important in their own culture.
That's a good reminder that forgotten often depends on where you're standing and how much translation and promotion happens. Speaking of overlooked European voices, are there any lesser-known fairy tale authors who deserve more attention? Like, besides Hans Christian Andersen, it feels like he overshadows everyone.
Absolutely. Think about Helena Niblum. She was a Danish-Swedish author of children's stories and fairy tales, active during the exact same period as Andersen.
Really? Same time?
Yep. Yet her stories are nowhere near as well-known and not super accessible in English. She published several collections late 19th, early 20th century, often exploring nature, human connection, moral dilemmas, but with a unique, sometimes darker, more symbolic approach than Andersen.
That sounds fascinating. Another female voice may be overlooked in favor of a male contemporary?
It's possible it played a role. Her story, All the Wild Waves of the Sea, is a fantastic example of her unique vision. It's described as a kind of reverse Little Mermaid with a human heroine who longs for the sea.
Oh, interesting. Not the mermaid wanting to be human.
No, the princess falls for a merman, and, unlike Andersen's mermaid wanting a soul, Niblum's princess actively yearns to become part of the wild, untamed ocean. It's a fresh, maybe more rebellious take on familiar tropes.
Wow. That makes you wonder how many other great stories like hers are out there waiting to be translated and rediscovered. These European gems really show the rich tapestry beyond the usual suspects. So what does this mean for writers closer to home? The U.S. literary scene, it's huge, it's influential globally, but it must have its own share of bewildering blind spots, right? Forgotten talents who shaped American letters but somehow missed the public imagination.
It truly does. The U.S. literary landscape is incredibly rich, this sprawling garden of voices. But even here, some brilliant authors seem to slip through the cracks of widespread recognition, despite maybe huge output or undeniable critical acclaim. It's puzzling, especially given the sheer volume of publishing and literary talk in America.
Let's start with someone who sounds incredibly prolific, but maybe isn't a name on everyone's lips. Jim Harrison. The source calls him a national treasure, ? Why the question mark?
Jim Harrison, who sadly passed away a few years back, wrote 36 books. 36. And his output was described as impossibly varied, yet impossibly consistent.
Wow, varied how?
Novels like Dalva and Legends of the Fall, novellas, he was brilliant at those short stories, poems, the blending nature and philosophy, reportage, memoir, even wicked writing about food. His passion for cooking and eating was right up there with his writing.
Okay, real Renaissance man of letters.
Totally. Known for his rugged individualism, love of the natural world, especially the American West, unflinching portrayals of characters on the fringes. This sheer volume and quality across so many forms led one reviewer to ask, why isn't this man regarded as a national treasure?
Yeah, why isn't he?
It's a good question. His last novel, The Big Seven, even brought back his recurring character, the retired cop Simon Sunderson. He gave so much, had such a distinct voice, yet his status as a national treasure isn't as universally recognized as you might expect.
36 books. That's astonishing. Baffling he wouldn't be more celebrated. What about writers whose prose itself is celebrated, but they remain puzzlingly obscure, even among literary folks?
That brings us to Gail Jones. Daniel Handler, Lemony Snicket said in an interview he was just bewildered by her obscurity. He said, "For the life of me, I cannot see why Gail Jones is not considered a major American writer. Her eye is fierce and wise, her prose is vivid and gorgeous, and her subject matter is a necessary addition to the conversation."
That's powerful. Fierce and wise. What does she write about?
Jones burst onto the scene in the 70s with novels like Corregidora and Eva's Man, really raw, unflinching explorations of tough themes: race, sex, violence, the legacies of slavery, often using experimental forms in this powerful lyrical language rooted in blues and oral traditions.
Sounds intense.
Definitely challenging, but profoundly rewarding. And having someone like Handler champion her so strongly just underscores the mystery of her relative obscurity compared to her contemporaries. Her work is clearly vital, but somehow hasn't permeated the mainstream as much as it maybe should have.
A necessary addition to the conversation. It makes you wonder what conversations we're missing by not having her work more widely read.
Okay, let's shift gears. Someone who truly bridged cultures, introduced a whole new world of stories to the West, like a literary ambassador.
That would absolutely be Lafcadio Hearn. He played this pivotal role introducing Japanese folktales, especially ghost stories, to a Western audience. His collections and translations, most famously Kwaidan, stories and strange things.
Go on. Okay, ghost stories. Yeah, published in 1904. Kwaidan means ghost stories or strange tales. It's this collection delving into the rich, mystical world of Japanese folklore, bringing ancient legends and eerie supernatural tales to English readers, really for the first time in that way.
And his life was interesting, too.
Fascinating. Born on a Greek island, Irish father, Greek mother, lived in Greece, Ireland, England, the U.S., the Caribbean, before settling in Japan in 1890.
Wow, quite the journey.
And there, he married Kozumi Setsuko, a Japanese woman, became a Japanese citizen, and took her last name.
That's incredible. So he really immersed himself and brought that into his writing.
Absolutely. His process combined rigorous research in old Japanese books with collaborative storytelling, often helped by his wife Setsuko, sharing oral traditions, and then meticulous translation for an international audience. His prose was known for being evocative, sensory, capturing Japan's beauty and mystery.
So why isn't he a bigger name when we talk about bridging East and West, or even supernatural fiction?
It's strange, isn't it? He was also very self-conscious about an injured left eye. Apparently it caused him discomfort, so most photos show him looking down, or only his right side. But despite his unique experience, his cross-cultural immersion, his pioneering work, yeah, he's often not the first name people think of.
Okay, from cultural bridges to the dark depths, let's talk about a writer whose life was cut short, but whose influence on horror is undeniable, even if his name isn't as famous as, say, Lovecraft.
You must meet William Hoke Hodgson. His writing was deeply shaped by his time as a sailor.
Okay, how did that come through?
It gave his nautical horror this incredibly clear, visual, and lived-in quality. He'd sailed extensively, seen the power and terror of the ocean firsthand, and poured that into his fiction. It meant his scary tentacle monsters, his descriptions of deep-sea horrors, felt weirdly convincing.
Convincing tentacle monsters.
Yeah, and remarkably, he wrote about these creatures, this kind of cosmic horror from the vast unknown ocean, before Lovecraft ever did.
Get out. Before Lovecraft, that's huge.
It really is. His short story, A Tropical Horror, from 1905, is a great example. Terrifying, unseen entity lurking beneath the waves, preying on a ship's crew, evokes that dread and alienness that became Lovecraft's hallmark later.
So why isn't Hodgson a household name in horror then, given he was there first?
Well, despite pioneering cosmic and nautical horror and writing diverse stuff, cult detective fiction, like his character Carnacki the Ghost Finder, fantasy, sci-fi, poetry, his life was tragically cut short.
Oh, no.
He enlisted in World War I, like many British authors, and was killed by an artillery shell in Belgium in 1918.
Oh, that's tragic.
Yeah. His early death undoubtedly limited his long-term literary trajectory and recognition. Unlike authors who had decades to build careers, Hodgson's voice was silenced prematurely. His work had to be rediscovered later by horror fans and scholars.
So these American talents, like the Europeans, show the map is full of unexplored places, even here. And sometimes tragedy just cuts things short.
And this raises an important question, doesn't it? Beyond individual circumstances, beyond personal choices, is there maybe a systemic bias? A historical pattern at play in who gets remembered and who slips into obscurity?
It feels like it sometimes.
Because when you look at some names, particularly women writers, it feels like more than just bad luck or niche appeal. It feels like a deeper historical tendency.
It really does. Like certain voices, especially women's voices, historically had to fight harder to be heard. And even when their brilliance was acknowledged, their place in the canon wasn't always secure. Let's talk about Christina Stead. She had serious critical backing, right? The praise was extraordinary.
She did, which makes her relative obscurity even more baffling. Stead, an Australian novelist, often considered one of the most significant English-language writers of the 20th century. Her novel, The Man Who Loved Children, published in 1940, well, it got this dazzling introduction by the acclaimed American poet and critic Randall Jarrell for its 1965 reissue.
Randall Jarrell. Big deal.
Huge deal. And Jarrell repeatedly linked Stead with Tolstoy.
With Tolstoy? Wow.
Yeah, comparing her epic scope and psychological insight to one of the giants. He described her prose as having a continuous, overwhelming, Joycian eloquence.
Okay, so praise doesn't get much higher than that.
You'd think not. Yet, as Jonathan Franzen pointed out in the New York Times, despite this powerful championing, the world just failed to turn on to the book. It didn't achieve widespread readership.
So even with Jarrell shouting from the rooftops, the book and Stead didn't stick with the wider public. That's perplexing. Sounds like a case study in how critical acclaim doesn't always equal popular success or lasting canonical status.
It gets even more puzzling. Consider her absence from a 1980 study of the 100 most cited 20th century writers. That list had Atwood, Gertrude Stein, and I.S. Nin, but no Christina Stead.
That's bizarre.
Franzen highlights that her novel, which dives into these complex, often suffocating family dynamics, cries out for academic criticism of every stripe. Feminist analysis, psychological studies, literary theory, you name it.
Right, it sounds perfect for that.
Yet it has failed to become a core text in every women's studies program in the country, despite its clear relevance. It suggests a systemic issue, right? A failure of canonization, despite the obvious literary merit and social relevance. It's almost as if some brilliant women writers just don't get woven into the fabric of what's considered essential reading, even when they absolutely should be.
That is a stark example. A voice that should be central but somehow stays peripheral. What about writers whose work challenged norms so much it was actively suppressed, even erased for a time? That's a whole other level of forgotten.
That leads us straight to Carmen de Burgos, a truly remarkable Spanish author, late 19th, early 20th century. Often described as a neglected or marginal author, but one of immense culture, driven by this anhelo de modernidad y de justicia social, a yearning for modernity and social justice.
Okay.
Her prolific work represented free and modernizing thought, but that was tragically abolished after the Spanish Civil War, when Franco came to power with his repressive patriarchal regime.
So her ideas were seen as dangerous.
Absolutely. In fact, her books were among the first authors prohibited by decree right after the war, actively removed from circulation.
Wow, not just overlooked, but actively erased. That's chilling, and her focus seems particularly relevant for that period of huge social change.
Precisely. Burgos distinctively addressed the woman question, the emerging debates around women's rights, education, roles in society. This was a subject largely ignored by the famous male writers of her time, the generation of 1898.
The generation of 98, they were focused on Spain's identity, right? Big national themes.
Exactly. Grand themes of national spirit, historical destiny after the Spanish-American War. But Burgos, as critic Michael Ugarte says, she wrote Spanish women's intrahistoria most articulately and elaborately.
Intrahistoria, what's that?
It means the unrecorded, everyday lives and concerns of people. The stuff often overlooked in big historical narratives. Burgos brought these private, often painful women's experiences right to the forefront.
So she was filling this crucial gap, giving voice to experiences that were otherwise silent, especially women navigating a changing but still deeply patriarchal society.
Exactly. Roberta Johnson notes that literary modernism, the big aesthetic trend then, was often a particularly masculine movement. It emphasized form, philosophy, often over social issues, like women's shifting roles.
Right.
Burgos's social modernism, as Johnson calls it, boldly flies in the face of tradition by centering those social concerns. And despite the acknowledged diversity of the male Gen 98 writers, no woman, including Burgos, is considered integral to that group. Why? Because her concerns and the styles and genres in which she chooses to express them are different.
She didn't fit their mold. Too modern, too focused on women's reality for the male literary establishment.
That seems to be the case.
What an incredible life must be behind such a courageous and fierce writer. Tell us more about her personal journey. It sounds as compelling as her fiction.
Her life really does read like fiction, a testament to resilience and passion. Born 1867 in Almeria, married at just 16 to an alcoholic, unfaithful husband who neglected his printing business.
Oh, wow. 16.
Yeah. Carmen, showing incredible grit, stepped in to manage it herself, then got her teaching certificate. After the devastating death of her infant son, she left her husband a huge scandal, then moved to Madrid with her daughter, and supported them just by writing articles for newspapers.
It's an incredible strength.
She became the first woman on the editorial staff of a major paper. editing Coinfo Seminole. And her output was just astounding. A dozen novels, 110 short novels or stories, 30 major translations, including Tolstoy and Leopardi, literary studies, biographies, groundbreaking work on women's rights, hundreds of newspaper articles.
She was a powerhouse.
Absolutely. A tireless advocate for social justice, a pioneering feminist, yet her immense contributions were marginalized, suppressed for decades. Her life itself was an act of social modernism.
That's truly remarkable. Resilience and intellectual power. Can you give us a specific example from her stories, so something that shows how she tackled these woman questions and her unique social modernism?
Certainly. Let's look at Por las Animas, for the souls. It vividly depicts urban Madrid life, early 20th century. Opens with meticulous detail. The train station, mobile cafes, sweepers, sounds, light, incredibly immersive, a real slice of life.
Okay.
But within this bustling scene, Burgos subtly exposes the glaring double standard around marital infidelity. The male character, Manuel, has a mistress, and he casually believes his infidelity is always profitable for the wife as long as she doesn't know it.
Oh, nice guy.
Right. Cynical, self-serving, patriarchal justification. But then he mistakenly assumes his wife, Amparo, is also having an affair based on her totally innocent act of giving money to the church for souls in purgatory, a common practice then. And Manuel reacts with irrational, violent rage, tries to hurt her, declares the marriage over. The story powerfully shows how irrational the accepted cultural mores are regarding gender, without hammering you over the head with it.
It shows the hypocrisy instead of just stating it.
Exactly. It was common, tolerated for upper-class men to have mistresses,
Yeah.
but totally unacceptable, violently punished for a woman to even be suspected of it. This narrative choice, focusing on everyday actions to expose deeper societal flaws, that's her social modernism. It's demanding literature, challenging norms, giving us an oppositional and often omitted perspective.
That's incredibly stark and so subtly done, makes her work feel vital, not just historical documents. And this idea of disappearing, it isn't just historical figures or suppressed voices, is it? It extends to contemporary writers and maybe a whole other group of unsung heroes.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Idra Nove and her insights into the disappearing act of women and translators. Nove is a contemporary American novelist, poet, and also a translator of several prominent Latin American authors.
Yeah.
In an interview, she revealed her novel Ways to Disappear directly explores the profound significance of the word disappear. Not just in Latin American history, where political disappearances were tragically common.
Right, a very literal, terrifying meaning there.
Exactly. But also for women writers and of translators who have both historically disappeared from the public record. She draws this powerful, almost unsettling parallel between these seemingly different kinds of absence.
That's a potent connection. Historical reality and the experiences of creative professionals today. What exactly does she mean by women writers disappearing from the public record now?
Novi highlights what she calls the absurd and persistent tendency to underestimate the literary significance of women writers early in their careers. She sees this pattern where women often need to write 3 or 4 books before receiving international attention, while male counterparts might get that recognition sooner, maybe even with a debut.
So a slower path to recognition, a subtle bias making it harder to gain traction early on.
It suggests that, not necessarily active suppression today, but maybe a passive oversight, a slower burn that requires women writers to work longer, harder to prove their worth and maintain visibility. It can still lead to obscurity.
And her focus on translators is really striking. They're often invisible bridges, aren't they? Their work is so vital.
She champions them passionately, calls them the secret heroes of literature. She laments this enduring resistance to acknowledging that translators exist publicly. Presses often hide the translator's name on the copyright page instead of celebrating the beautiful collaboration that brings a book into a new language.
That's terrible. Their name should be on the cover.
You'd think so. Novi asserts that being a translator and being a woman writer is to struggle continually with existing and not existing at the same time.
Wow. That's such a poignant way to put it, the struggle with existence. Crucial, yet invisible.
It really captures the paradox of their labor. Essential work, but often rendered invisible, their names omitted from the very books they painstakingly recreate.
Does her own translation work embody this idea, championing the undervalued?
Yes, definitely. Her translation of Clarice Lispector's The Passion, according to G.H., showcases another writer often undervalued in the U.S. Lispector, a Brazilian literary giant, wrote highly philosophical, experimental, introspective prose.
Revered in Brazil, but maybe less known here.
For a long time, yes. Not as widely read or understood in the English-speaking world. Novi sees Lispector's work, like her own, as a deeply political novel about class and race and gender, even with its abstract stream of consciousness style. By highlighting these hidden acts of creation and interpretation, and through her own work, Novi sheds light on the unseen labor and systemic challenges contributing to the obscurity of so many brilliant voices.
So the mechanisms of forgetting, they're not just passive things like time and taste, but sometimes active suppressions or biases rooted in historical power dynamics.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We've talked specific authors, categories, but beyond individual talent or even systemic biases against certain voices. What are the broader, maybe less visible forces at play? Why do some authors, despite brilliance, just get lost in the shuffle while others soar to lasting fame? It feels like a really intricate system.
It is a complex ecosystem, really. No single simple answer. It's more like a perfect storm of elements coming together, as we've heard from readers, critics, even folks inside publishing. A confluence of factors.
Like what?
Well, everything from the sheer volume of stuff being published to how the market operates, shifts in public interest. Even the author's own public persona.
So it's not just quality, it's volume, timing, changing tastes, almost Darwinian, this literary survival.
Exactly. One blunt perspective you hear, especially online, is Sturgeon's Law. Theodore Sturgeon, the sci-fi author, he famously said 90% of everything is crap.
Huh, okay. Maybe a bit harsh. A bit harsh and debatable percentage-wise, but it acknowledges the overwhelming volume of content. More broadly, though, beyond Sturgeon's Law, just time winnows away at reputations. Very few authors write truly immortal prose that transcends every generation.
Makes sense. Tastes change.
Think of J.B. Cabell, prolific satirist, popular in the 1920s, known for intricate, elusive style, fantasy worlds. Yet a reader today might find his dense prose, reliance on very specific cultural references of his era, complex allegories, kind of impenetrable.
So he feels dated now.
To many, yeah. His work didn't stand the test of time for a broad audience. It shows the test of time isn't just about inherent quality, but also enduring accessibility, universal themes. What resonated deeply then might become a puzzle now.
That makes profound sense, like natural selection for literature. Readability, cultural relevance matter as much as artistic merit. But there's more, right? The business side. Publishing machinery must play a huge role.
Oh, absolutely. Publishing and market dynamics are critical. The modern publishing landscape is incredibly crowded. You've got the constant push for new authors, the next bestseller,
Right.
plus the huge rise of self-published authors flooding the market. It's overwhelming. In this environment, an author's visibility is often tied to their latest release. If a publisher sees sales drop for new books, they might stop printing the backlist.
Meaning all their older books disappear?
Potentially, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The author's whole body of work can eventually fall out of print, making them hard to find. John Brunner, the sci-fi author known for dystopian novels like Stand on Zanzibar, he's cited as an example. Despite critical success, much of his work became hard to find for a while.
And that's super frustrating for readers trying to find more obscure books by otherwise famous authors like Saberhagen or Zelazny, only to find they're out of print, or really expensive collector's items.
Exactly. So if the machine stops printing copies, an author can literally vanish from bookshelves, even if the work is still great. That's a powerful mechanical force, way beyond the author's control.
Okay, what about the cultural climate? Changing tastes, the zeitgeist. How does that affect an author's relevance?
Changing tastes and cultural zeitgeist are major factors. Older works can become quaint or even feel irrelevant if their scientific or social assumptions seem outdated.
Like old sci-fi before DNA testing, or where computers are just people with slide rules?
Exactly. It can feel anachronistic. The core story might be strong, but those details can make it less relatable, pushing it into obscurity.
So a book's relevance can be tied to its era, like a time capsule, which explains why some authors resonate more at certain moments, like Andy Weir's The Martian hitting big just as SpaceX was taking off.
Precisely. The techno-social zeitgeist can make an author huge if their themes align with current events or hopes. Conversely, like we saw with Carmen de Burgos, an author's concerns or style might just not seem to fit the dominant trends or academic frameworks of their time. Her social modernism, her focus on women, was different from the male literary movements. That can lead to marginalization, even if the work is crucial. It's about whether the establishment and the public are ready for what they have to say.
And beyond these big forces, what about something simple, like people just not knowing about an author? Word of mouth still feels powerful, even now.
It is, maybe more than ever. This is the lack of critical mass and word of mouth. If an author's work never reached the critical mass where enough people read them in the first place, few noticed. It's a vicious cycle, right?
No readers means no buzz means no new readers.
Pretty much. Awards and prizes try to point out gems, but mostly remembering the good is often left to chance word of mouth. Who recommended what to whom, what else was popular then. It's organic, almost accidental, which highlights why active reading communities, like on Reddit, are vital. They consciously boost their memory, discussing, recommending. They become torchbearers.
Passing on the legacy, one recommendation at a time. It seems like the author themselves can contribute to, maybe unintentionally, through their public persona or lack of one.
Yeah, authorial persona and publicity definitely play a role, especially now with social media author tours. Henry Green's deliberate elusiveness pseudonym, refusing photos, probably didn't help his popular success, like Waugh said. He built a wall. Similarly, Alice Munro, before her Nobel Prize, had this famously remote public persona. Lived quietly in rural Canada, reluctant to take a public role as a writer, admitted feeling like a gigantic fraud doing publicity.
Wow. That personal reticence, while maybe helping her focus on her craft, might have limited her broader reach initially?
Possibly. It's that tension. Quiet artist versus the need for visibility. Conversely, some authors embrace mystique effectively, like romance novelist Alexis Hall, whose bio says he's a pile of threadbare hats and used teacups given a semblance of life by forbidden sorcery.
Huh. That's memorable.
Right. Adds to his appeal. And in the modern era, popularity in one medium can even eclipse another. Look at Sam Harris. Written really interesting philosophical books, but now his literary contributions are often overshadowed by his hugely popular podcast.
Right. People know the podcast more than the books.
Exactly. So these are some of the intricate, overlapping reasons why brilliant authors might end up underrated or forgotten. It's a delicate, unpredictable balance.
This makes you wonder, doesn't it? About the books you love and who else knows about them. It puts this fascinating twist on our reading habits, makes them feel less solitary, more like we have a role in keeping literary memory alive.
Indeed. Critical thinking is vital with information overload, but so is active engagement. Idra Novi put it beautifully. Reading is a kind of translation. You have to translate the words on a page into meaning in your mind.
So it's not passive consumption, it's dynamic, creative. We're actively constructing meaning, bringing the author's vision to life in our own heads.
Exactly. We're part of the process of keeping them alive, ensuring their meaning resonates. We become active participants in their ongoing existence.
Which brings us to the power of recommendation and active discovery. Those discussions among readers, like on Reddit, they're crucial.
Absolutely. By engaging, recommending books, gifting them, sharing authors you love online, you're actively participating in that word of mouth that stops authors fading. You become a crucial link in the chain of literary memory.
It's like we become custodians, ensuring these incredible voices don't just vanish. We're part of the ongoing conversation.
Precisely. If enough people talk about an author to the next generation or two, that author may become a part of the current canon passed down to the next generation. This deep dive itself hopefully serves that purpose, encouraging you to explore these authors, maybe become a champion for their work.
Seeking out that demanding literature, the stuff that challenges norms, offers unexpected perspectives.
Or provides an oppositional and often omitted perspective. It can be deeply rewarding, offers insights into lives you might otherwise never encounter, broadens your empathy, your worldview. It's about cultivating a more expansive, curious approach to reading.
So what does this all mean for us as readers, as lovers of story? It means the literary landscape is vast, rich, full of hidden depths. Countless incredible voices, some whispered about, some nearly silent, waiting for you to discover or rediscover them.
Yeah, it's a reminder that literature isn't just the bestseller list. It's a living history, full of secret passages, forgotten rooms waiting to be explored.
The act of reading, especially choosing to seek out overlooked or marginalized voices, it feels like an act of cultural preservation, critical engagement.
It really does. It enriches our understanding of that intra-historia, the nuanced hidden lives often omitted from big narratives. These slices of life provide perspectives that broaden empathy, challenge assumptions, deepen our connection to the shared human story.
Indeed. So here's a final thought to mull over. In a world saturated with new releases, algorithm recommendations, What responsibility do we as curious readers have to actively seek out and champion the forgotten geniuses, the underrated voices, the ones who might offer unique insights, challenge our norms, or just give us an intensely pleasurable private experience unlike anything else?
And what hidden gems are waiting out there for you to uncover next?